or via Zoom from anywhere in the world. And thank you for the previous panel for setting us up well for this morning session on learning from social cohesion innovators, promising practices for operations and programming. My name is Katie Lance, and I'm Senior Researcher of Peace and Conflict at Mercy Corps, and I have the honor of facilitating today's session. As you can tell, most of our presenters will be online with us. We are lucky to have a diverse array of panelists representing a mix of practitioners, researchers, and donors. This includes Brenda Engola, who is the Advancing Peace in Complex Crisis Senior Advisor at Mercy Corps, Nicolas Perrin, who works as Global Lead of the CDD Global Solution Group for the World Bank, Dr. Onur Ariner, Social Cohesion Mainstreaming Senior Advisor for the Promotion of Economic Prospects PEP program for GIZ. Here in person, we have Dr. Aisalkyn Botoeva, Research Evaluation and Learning Specialist at Search for Common Ground. And last but not least, also online, we have Michèle Sahabo, who works as Program Manager for Catholic Relief Services, Uganda. During the first half of the session, each panelist will give a 5-minute lightning presentation to discuss various elements to consider when implementing social cohesion interventions. The presentations will be based on their experiences working with programs in a variety of settings, ranging from the Gulf of Guinea to Sri Lanka. The second half of the panel will be dedicated to Q&A. If you're just joining us now, since this is a hybrid event, questions will be taken from in-person audience members as well as those participating via Zoom. If you are on Zoom, feel free to post your questions via the chat, and we will then pose them to the panel. For our online panelists, just a reminder that Anastasia will be sharing your slides. And so when you are ready to go on to the next slide, simply say next slide. In addition, Lisa Inks will be our focal point and timekeeper. So please watch the chat as she will be giving you warnings of 1 minute and once your time is up. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to our first panelist, Brenda Engola. Brenda, on to you.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. I would like to thank colleagues from the core sponsoring organizations who put in all the work to provide an opportunity for us to interact through this conference. As I start off, I don't want to spend too much time on theory, but I would just want to highlight or emphasize something that Ryan mentioned earlier, which is that at Mercy Corps, we frame our thinking on social cohesion around 6 key dimensions. Those are the dimensions of trust, collective action, civic engagement, shared purpose, identity, belonging, and attitude towards outgroups. In case anyone is wondering, I won't be using any presentation for this 5-minute session. I'll just be speaking freely. So our programs at Mercy Corps prioritize an understanding of how the different dimensions, how the different approaches contribute to those 6 mentioned dimensions of social cohesion. And for the purpose of this discussion, I will highlight 2 approaches that we consider core, but not exclusive, in our social cohesion programming based on our global experiences. So the first approach that I will speak to is providing opportunities for collective action across lines of division, which entails providing spaces and opportunities for meaningful, repeated exposure and positive interaction between members of conflicting groups. Our experiences indicate that this approach contributes to the social cohesion dimensions of trust and collective action. Mercy Corps' program in Nigeria, the Conquer Project, for example, provided spaces and opportunities for community members from Hada and pastoralist communities in the Middle Belt to participate in 14 community-led projects, which included community gardens, markets, and milling facilities. What we found is that that project contributed to a 17% improvement in trust between community members from those conflicting groups. Other findings from the Conquer project also indicated that 90% of the project participants expressed acceptance of people from other religious groups, while 50% recognized the benefits of joint initiatives, joint economic initiatives. And that's not to say that a collective action approach should just be about delivering community projects or initiatives. The processes that underpin the delivery of these projects are often the very ingredients that build towards social cohesion dimensions. For example, we need to think about inclusion. Who is included and who is not included, and why are they not included? What are the mechanisms through which we can strengthen inclusiveness of these processes? Another thing we could think of in terms of process is the aspect of decision-making. Do the processes provide for iterative decision-making, or do they not? Iterative decision-making can provide good opportunities for participants to practice or develop some of the skills that are important for social cohesion. Things like negotiation, deliberation, tolerance of different viewpoints or broadening of perspectives and building consensus are skills that contribute more broadly to social cohesion. That iterativeness of decision-making processes can also contribute to much needed local leadership during the implementation of community projects. So I'll move on to the second approach, which is facilitating deliberate engagement and inclusion of marginalized groups. And with this approach, we prioritize the systematic inclusion of marginalized groups, whether it's through standalone programming or through mainstream programming. And very often that will entail bringing together marginalized groups separately in a space where they feel safe and can constructively engage, so that they have an opportunity to build and develop relationships, strengthen various skills that they need to engage in the broader community, and also identify common priorities, build confidence and agency before they then go back to engage with the broader community and share their perspectives. From our experience, this approach contributes to social cohesion dimensions of belonging and identity. I will just briefly highlight an example from our work in Jordan, where Mercycorps Peace Pro program worked with a diverse range of stakeholders to reduce youth vulnerability to recruitment into violent groups. The approach used in that program was a whole of society approach, where all key segments of the society, including formal leaders, informal leaders, parents, caregivers, youth, ordinary community members, were supported to develop their capacity to support at-risk youth. That program also developed community action hubs, which provided a safe and inclusive space for the youth to interact with each other, to improve their psychosocial well-being, and also to learn how to build positive relationships with other community members, but also how to be productive members of their communities as well. That was also coupled with initiatives by local youth committees that supported youth participation in local community projects. So through that Peace Pro project, we found that 73% of youth perceived an increase in their social capital, while 80% felt that they were valued for contributing to a secure and productive society. So I'll
Brenda,
just wrap up by
so
emphasizing.
much.
Thank you
Brenda,
so much, Katie.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll look forward to hearing more details during the Q&A. And next, we're going to go on to Nicolas Perrin, Global Lead of the CDD Global Solution Group for the World Bank. Thank you, Nicolas.
Nicolas, you're muted still.
Okay, now can you hear me?
And Anastasia, we can see the slides on Zoom online, but we can't see them in the room.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Do. Okay. Okay, very well. So thank you very much. So I'm going to present you a little bit what we are doing at the moment in the West Africa and Sahel region. And next slide, please, where we basically are facing this increase of factors of stress in the region. So we have several hotspots. So we have, places in the region where you have, convergence of different factors like FCV, climate risks, poor governance, poverty. And it's basically something that has been increasing for the past 10 years or so. You see very well the spread in the map that I showed, which basically shows, some of the fatalities, but it's also, the area where you have problem of climate risks. There are usually areas where it's lagging regions. And when you look at the 10, 12 countries overall, you also notice that it's linked with an increase in terms of poor governance, lack of trust. There is a lot of coups that have happened in the region recently as well. So next slide, please. What we've been trying to do over the past 2 or 3 years was to develop a series of regional projects that we call Think Regionally and Act Locally, where we try to tackle hotspots. So we have the Lake Chad, we have the Liptako-Gourma, which is the free borders area in the Sahel, and we have the northern area of the Gulf of Guinea, where we try to have a similar approach, where we work both at the local level with populations through community and local development projects, and to basically have access to basic infrastructure, basic services. Then, as we do, we try to focus a lot on social cohesion approaches, trying to basically, link groups together, making them talk together, and try to identify common investment that they could be doing. By doing so, our hope is that we will basically boost the local resilience at the local level. We integrate also, the climate risk discussions, but also, the risk of violence, etc. And all these projects are also linked together by a knowledge management platform, which basically pick up some data, do some qualitative research. The idea is basically to, at the same time that we are developing activities, we can monitor it. Next slide, please. So this is the last project that we have, the Gulf of Guinea Northern Region Social Cohesion Project. It's a $450 million project covering the northern part of the 4 countries of the Gulf of Guinea, which basically has the structure that I was telling you about, community local development, local economic development, so you give opportunity to local people, focus on youth and vulnerable groups, so it's mostly women, pastoralists. And then we have some activities where we try to build the capacity of local institutions and community to participate. The diagram on the right-hand side is the diagram where we try to explain how we try to tackle the social cohesion intervention. So we try to do the bonding, the linking, the bridging that you've heard already. So we try to work at the community level so that everybody can work together, discuss about common diagnostic and solutions. We try to work across communities, do some intercommunal investments, especially between pastoralists and farmers. And of course, there is a big focus given to the relationship between the institutions, the local institutions, and the communities. So that's the linking. And all this, we try to tackle those 3 dimensions: economic dimensions with this local economic development, governance dimension by the processes of local planning, and social cultural dimensions by having a series, of social activities that try to bridge, the differences that different groups may have. Maybe next slide. Yes, so I wanted to finish this presentation with some question that I'm currently wondering myself. Because all these programs are underway, they've been starting. And I think, you know, 3 questions that I think we will be looking at are those. One is basically, how do we combine this last mile delivery that we are doing with this platform of community local development? We are going into places where there is not many actors going. And the idea is to provide a system that allows people to identify their needs and have access to services. And then how can we do it in such a way that we don't leave anyone behind? Because the issue of social cohesion is that you usually have groups which are kind of put aside and you try to basically put everybody together. So how do you set up systems which will serve everybody without, you know, losing in mind that you need to focus on some specific groups at the same time? And ideally, how do you do it in such a way that it is built in the country systems so that it's not, you know, just one shot during the project and then, you know, the good habit is forgotten. So that's what one of the things that we are trying to do at the moment, but we'll see if it works by working with local government and local communities, local NGOs, local farmer associations or pastoralist groups. The second question is about how do you balance the mainstreaming with the focus on specific social cohesion? I mean, the previous presentation showed a lot of, I would say, soft skills around social cohesion. And it's very important.
Nicolas, sorry, just to
yes.
mention.
Yes, but the point I wanted to make is that those soft skills need to be combined with hard investments. So how do you link the hard investments with the soft social cohesion activities that you do? And the last point is just that all this basically needs to be monitored. If we want to show that the notion of social cohesion is meaningful, we need to showcase that what we have been doing in one place on social cohesion has an impact, not just on social cohesion, but also on the local development of the area. Thank you. Sorry for being long, but I had some echoes.
Great, thank you so much, Nicolas. And next up, we have Dr. Onur Ariner, Social Cohesion Mainstreaming Senior Advisor for the Promotion of Economic Prospects, PEP program for GIZ. And he should also have slides, Anastasia.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry,
yes.
can you hear me? Okay, all right, great. All right, thank you very much. So the Promoting Economic Prospects program works in the livelihood sector of the refugee response to support the economic integration of Syrians into Turkey. As you know, Turkey has been hosting the largest refugee population in the world since 2014. If you can skip to slide 6, please, Anastasia. So what we found, basically, if you just keep going to slide 6, I'm skipping these for time. Yes, this is it. Yes, thank you very much, Anastasia. So what we found is that one-off activities that have been so long used in this refugee response in Turkey by many IGOs, INGOs, such as those bringing the Syrian and Turkish community together in picnics, site visits, film showings, etc., do not work. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians and Turkish citizens have participated in these activities in the last decade, and social distance between the two communities is ever increasing. In fact, to dangerous levels where fringe right-wing parties have popped up, stoking xenophobia for short-term political gain before the elections next year. So social psychology, of course, has been telling us since the 1950s that trust and reduction of negative prejudices among groups from different backgrounds is only possible when certain conditions of interaction are met, and that one-off activities rarely work. Unfortunately, we had to rediscover this at the cost of a lot of time, money, and effort spent for very little gain, if at all. So in order to implement meaningful activities promoting social cohesion, we found that it's necessary to first and foremost contextualize social cohesion. We have to fit the concept into the specific local context and the specific sector we work in. This is the only way to make social cohesion an organic part of what we're doing, rather than a forced and superficial add-on to our projects. We also found that our approach needs to be multifaceted in its design. That is, it should cover and bring together multiple components or as many relevant components within one intervention as possible. For instance, we found that pairing soft skills, communication, teamwork, etc., always pays dividends, and even more so for women who feel they're in safe spaces when it's put together with vocational training, with hard skills. Also, all activities need to promote sustained and regular interaction as much as possible, where every participant feels an equal part of the group, both in meaningfully contributing to the activity and having their voices heard in decisions taken. A final critical component of social cohesion is to ensure that we take a rights-based approach, especially with regard to emphasizing diversity and inclusion and gender equality in everything we do. So decent work is another critical issue for us as we work in the livelihood sector where 90% of Syrians are informally employed. We find that concepts or objectives such as trust, a sense of belonging, and working together for a common goal are given a lot more substance and made concrete through the well-established principles of human rights. So if we go to slide 9, please, Anastasia, three slides later. Yes. So to promote social cohesion in a meaningful way, PEP defines social cohesion as context where individuals and groups from different backgrounds are able to earn their living in dignity, coming together around and benefiting from inclusive working, learning, and business environments that promote resilience, respect for diversity, and equal access to opportunities. Next slide, please. So now on to some examples on how we try to support inclusive businesses. We train Syrians and Turkish citizens in exporting, and place Syrians into Turkish firms and Turks into Syrian firms. This has allowed businesses to access markets they had no foothold in before and massively increased appreciation from members of the other community. We also register informal businesses, expose them to other companies and market actors in business-to-business meetings, then also market their products under cultural themes such as food fairs or coffee fairs open to the public. Slide 11, please. The next slide. A very important tool, a very important tool for us to promote social cohesion in the livelihood sector have been cooperatives, which, as you know, are jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprises. We especially target women's cooperatives and provide them with business mentorship, language training, soft skills, and have found that they have become, to quote a beneficiary, homes in exile, where women are able to gain income in decent working conditions in solidarity with other women and are, as a result, empowered. For youth, we have programs from our partners supporting what is called reverse mentorship, where high-level executives from leading companies become mentees to young Syrians and Turkish graduates who teach them about new trends and markets to which youth are drawn to, as well as the importance of diversity and inclusion. So slide 12, please, the next slide. And we have programs that specifically target young women under structured and regular second-wave feminism type consciousness-raising meetings, where young refugee women are provided safe spaces where they can share and learn together and create friendships. We've seen successes in every iteration, with young women looking after each other's children, navigating Turkish bureaucracy, and finding jobs for each other long after the project's over. And slide 13, please, my final slide. So as I said, we promote an awareness of rights and rights-seeking behavior in all our participants and work with state institutions and bar associations to convey the rights of refugees on such critical issues as child marriage, polygamy, really important issues for the Syrian community, and other SGBV topics, as well as labor law, discrimination, etc., and access to justice. So the main idea here, of course, is that there's no possibility to establish trust and a sense of belonging in a context where one's rights are denied, where one is continuously discriminated against and exploited, and where there's no recourse to or hope of gaining justice. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Onur. Next up, we have our in-person panelist, Dr. Aisalkyn Botoeva, Research Evaluation and Learning Specialist at Search for Common Ground.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the organizers for putting this event together. In my brief presentation today, I would like to focus on how Search for Common Ground has been working at the intersection of social cohesion and digital peace building. At Search for Common Ground, we have been, and I think the slides aren't up yet, right? Yeah. I'll keep talking whenever they come up. That will be great. At Search for Common Ground, we have been approaching social cohesion. That's not. No.
Sorry. I don't think that I have the slides.
No? Okay, I was told that they're available, but Okay, no problem.
No, if you could quickly, so Marianne, if you could quickly upload it to the share file folder, I can pull it.
I think I sent them to Katie and Anastasia.
Sorry, they are in the shared folder, Anastasia, but I'll just re-email them to you right now.
Okay, I see him. Okay, 1 second.
Thank you.
Oh, this is a PDF file. Okay. I have it. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, 1 second.
Perfect, thank you.
1 second. I apologize for the delay. You see them?
Perfect. Yes, great. And you can go to the next slide.
C'est presque fini. Ah.
I think the next slide would be great. Perfect. Yes. All right. Take 2. So hi, everyone again. I am from Search for Common Ground. I will be focusing on the intersection of how Search has been working at, addressing social cohesion and also digital peace building. So at Search for Common Ground, we have been approaching social cohesion both in programming, but also in measuring across 3 main axes. First one is agency, basically looking at individuals' ability and also freedom to make a positive change in their communities that they regard as important. The second one is polarization, or what you may call horizontal, right, social cohesion, looking at relationships across dividing lines and how people relate to each other. And finally, it's the institutional legitimacy, or the vertical social cohesion, where we look at relationships between individuals and those who govern them. Now, we all know that with the expansion of social media and other digital spaces, addressing social cohesion has become ever more challenging for all of us. Dangerous online content, including hate speech, false news, cyberbullying, and inflammatory rumors, they can spread very quickly and reach millions. And the threat of harmful content is particularly pronounced in fragile contexts that have a history of violence across different dividing lines. So how has Search for Common Ground continued its mission to end violent conflict through digital peace-building programming? As one of the successful cases, I would like to focus on a project called Cyber Guardians, empowering youth and to combat online hate speech in Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. Search for Common Ground Sri Lanka country team implemented this project in 2019 and 2020. And the overarching goal of the project was to promote social cohesion and reconciliation that come among youth that come across different backgrounds and different dividing lines. We did this specifically by investing in 2 main things. One is in young people's ability to tackle hate speech, fake news, and other types of harmful content, and also generate positive content. And secondly, by creating opportunities for collaboration among participants who come from these various ethnic, religious, residential backgrounds. The project engaged 20 social media influencers, or those who have a considerable number of followers on social media platforms, as well as more than 100 young people who participated in series of boot camps and received mini grants. Both of these target groups were supported in their skills and knowledge of tackling hate speech and fake news, as well as their skills of generating positive content that promotes pluralism and also peaceful messaging. Cyber Guardians proved to be a successful case of what becomes possible when you actually invest in young people to constructively engage in online spaces with each other and with those who they consider as key decision makers. This project was among many others that Surge has implemented in Sri Lanka, but also other contexts where we have co-developed and promoted a lexicon, for example, right, to help identify ethnic and religious-based and gendered hate speech. Next slide. So the takeaways are, based on our experience, we have three main sets of recommendations for programs at the intersection, right, of digital peace building and social cohesion. The first one is, what works is investing in, and also measuring along the way, personal agency. In this case, it involved enhancing digital literacy, responsible media consumption, and also conflict-sensitive use of online tools among young people. In digital peace building programs, we have done this by enabling people to take the leap from passive consumers to actually active generators of content, and also in shaping these safe, healthy, and collaborative online spaces. The second recommendation, or what proves to work in our experience, is investing in and also measuring along the way horizontal cohesion. In this case, what we mean by this is ways in which people from different backgrounds can use digital tools to combat misinformation, hate speech, and share common online spaces. We have been doing this by working with content creators and champions for peace, but also tech companies, governments, and civil society organizations, so that they could all be using, for instance, automated tools to detect hate speech and misinformation, rather than waiting for the conflict dynamics to cascade into offline violence. And finally, what works is investing in vertical cohesion, right, or institutional legitimacy. In this case, this entails fostering citizen and government exchanges. We have done so both by enabling youth, CSOs, and grassroots activists to use digital tools and platforms to monitor and hopefully prevent eruptions of violence. And speaking of decision makers, we have done this by promoting solutions for internet-based government service provision, transparency, and direct communication from government agencies to citizens. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisalkyn. And next we'll move on to, last but not least, Michèle Sahabo, who works as Program Manager for Catholic Relief Services, Uganda. And after this, we'll open it up to Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Anastasia, can you help with the slides?
Yes, one moment.
You definitely have it. I saw it earlier.
Yeah.
If you can just do presentation mode. Thank you. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I know you're in different parts of the world. My name is Michèle Sahabo, and I'm the program manager for a recovery program called Homes and Communities at CRS in Uganda. So today, I'd like to present to you what we're doing with working with South Sudanese refugees in a refugee settlement called BDBD in the very north of Uganda. Next slide, please, Anastasia. So we kind of did things in a different way, in that we honestly did not know anything about social cohesion when we started this project in 2020. And so we began with this beautiful vision of empowering the community to lead their own recovery. So it's all about sustainability and resilience. So I like to say that it's by the community and for the community. So we began with a typical recovery interventions, such as livelihoods, So we have agricultural, saving groups, and business skills components within livelihood. We also provide shelter for the absolutely most vulnerable participants. And then we also have a community center to bring people together, which also provides some skilling opportunities, but also sporting and services. So about a year into the project, we realized that for sustainability and let me call it sustainable recovery, we will definitely need to bring in social cohesion. And honestly, we didn't realize it until our wonderful colleagues at the headquarters social cohesion team reached out and said, hey, would you like to bring this together? And that's honestly when we realized this was the missing part. And so it's been about a year and a few months that we've brought in social cohesion, and it has made a huge difference. So for starters, we began by implementing social cohesion as a standalone component. So we worked with local structures to implement exactly the same approaches that some of our colleagues, previous presenters, have actually mentioned as well: bridging, bonding, basically intergroup, intra-group, but also horizontally with leadership. Next slide, please. Yes, so throughout these approaches, some of the things that we have done, maybe to give you a very quick background, South Sudanese refugees came in, most of them came in about 2016, 2017. So they've been in Uganda for a couple of years, and honestly, there is no near vision of them going back. So we're looking at, okay, how do we integrate them into the local community? So conflict-wise, we have conflict between the South Sudanese themselves, as well as the local host Ugandan nationals. And then we also have within the groups, so within the South Sudanese, the different tribes. And so sometimes we have conflict there. And so some of the approaches we're using is inclusion and strong coordination. And this is within all the stakeholders. We have protection partners, we have government entities, both from the refugee side and from the local district side. And we have UNHCR, of course, and local community leaders within the refugees and within the host communities. So there are a lot of stakeholders to work with, but without, again, everything is community-led. So without their inclusion and strong coordination, social cohesion basically wouldn't be possible. So we've really emphasized on that, and it's working well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, everything we're doing, all our activities are community-led. This means that we work with existing community structures. So there are peace groups within schools, within general youth, have some peace groups, others are comprised of adults. And so we didn't come in creating new groups. We mapped the ones that were existing, and we asked those that would like to take part in activities. And those are the ones, the volunteered ones, are the ones we're working with. So by asking them to do mapping, to identify all the issues in their communities, to ask them to also come up with the solutions they feel will work for their community members. And then what we do is facilitate. So having that community-led engagement, solution finding has really enabled us, has really enabled us to make this a lot more sustainable. And it has increased the ownership. Next slide, please. Right, so a couple of months in, what we've done now is we've gone from the standalone implementation, which tackled these main 4 issues you're seeing there. I'm going quickly because we have very limited time, to now taking it to the next level and mainstreaming it. So we've just done an assessment to identify where the issues are within, for example, our savings groups component, our agriculture, community center, shelter, and business skills, so that we ensure that we are not creating more harm, but we're actually, as we implement, for example, the livelihood community interventions, we're bringing people together so that they're more cemented. And this is a mix of refugees and hosts, and within South Sudanese, it's also a mix of tribes, and it is really working well. For example, saving groups, some of them are mixed and they have common projects, which is wonderful. It's really working well. Next slide. Sorry, my time's up. Next slide. This is the last slide. So basically, just quickly on the impact, we've seen this really having a fantastic impact in that the communities really have ownership of the activities that are happening. So it's not CRS coming and telling them, this is what we're going to do. They decide and they implement it along with their leaders and fellow community members. So there's a huge ownership of what's happening. And then there's a strengthened integration amongst inter and intra groups. And of course, the community center that we have in our project has also become a huge hub of social cohesion activities through various activities that are happening for youth. And then one of the things I want to mention before I finish is that the interventions are targeted. The way we include gender in it is that there are some common activities, but others that are specifically targeted for young girls, young boys, men, and girls. And by separating those, just like our colleague in Turkey, it has really created a bigger impact, and it's definitely working. Over.
Great, thank you so much, Michèle, and thank you to all of our panelists today. I know it's very hard to get in a lot of information in a 5-minute lightning presentation, so I appreciate your efforts. And now I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So we'll collect a few questions from the in-person audience, pose them to the panelists. Panelists, you can choose which questions you want to respond to based on whatever is most relevant to your own experiences. And then we will also pose some questions from the Zoom participants as well. So I'm going to open it up with a first question, and some of you touched on this a little bit, but wondering what are some specific things we need to bear in mind when designing social cohesion programs? We heard it's not always incredibly maybe a positive experience. How do we ensure to do no harm, take care of those concerns, and how to take care not to deteriorate social cohesion, maybe have the opposite effect of what we're intending? So that's my first question. Are there any questions from the in-person audience we can add? Yes, and there's microphones on your tables, so you can just turn those on. I'm not sure which button it is to turn on.
Yeah, can you hear? Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Professor Karina Karastelina from Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. We now, as a school, I'm leading a project now with the State Department. We're doing very similar assessment of contact theory. It's multi-year project, and one of the most important tension which I identified, there are many of them, but one was touched, and I want to get your input on it. It's tension between promoting contact, really effective, but in the same time promoting collective actions. And a lot of practice literature and also academic literature show major tension because they have completely different goals and completely different ways to achieve it. So how you deal with the tension, how you actually promote social change and collective action at the same time, bringing people in positive contact with each other. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions we can gather from in person? Yes, way in the back.
Thank you. Am I audible? This is good. This is Alfredo Manfredini-Böhm from the World Bank. Thank you for the presentation. I was going to ask about a bit of a thorny issue that we've also had to grapple in programming that I hope you'll hear about later, which is how to strike the right balance between bridging and bonding, right? To the extent that you create social cohesion activities that tend towards social cohesion, you will have to choose where to draw the line as to who to include. And so you immediately create an in and an out group in deciding the scope of your programming. I was wondering if maybe the colleague from CRS could reflect on how they decided, to split up participants by gender and by provenance, as opposed to having a whole group. But really, it applies to all the interventions seen so far. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Maybe a last question from the in-person audience. Marine?
I'm Marine Gassier from the World Bank. I have a question for Onur, but maybe for everybody, about the connection between a rights-based approach and trust. I thought you made a really good point about how it's really hard to improve social cohesion in environments where the human rights situation isn't great. At the same time, at the project level, you can do human rights education, but it can be hard to make meaningful change in the situation. So I was curious about how you approach this. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So to recap a few questions, what do we need to bear in mind when designing social cohesion programs? In terms of contact theory, how do we sort of grapple with the tensions of working with collective actions, contact when trying to implement social change, specifically for Michèle, but maybe others can chime in. How do you balance between promoting activities between bridging and bonding social cohesion? Where do you draw the line of who to include? And finally, for Marine, for Onur, I didn't write as many notes, but focus on rights-based approach and trust and that balance there. So I'll open it up to the panelists. We'll start, go through the same order. So we'll start with Brenda. If you would like to respond to any of these questions, and we'll give each panelist a couple minutes and then we'll move to online questions.
Thank you, Katie. I think in terms of the question you asked about what to bear in mind, and I think this also is relevant to some of the other questions around social change, collective action, and bringing people together. I think context is central and context is fundamental. We need to invest always in trying our best to understand and appreciate the context before determining what kind of social cohesion approach to use in a given context or what kind of dimensions to target. I think the very best social cohesion approaches could be harmful or ineffective if they're not grounded in the context in which programs are being implemented. I spoke, for example, earlier about marginalization. So we've talked about bringing marginalized or minority individuals or community members into processes that promote social cohesion at a community level. And sometimes there's an assumption that people are willing to welcome these groups to participate, and all that we need to do is really empower these groups and build their agency and all that. But we also need to work on the other side to really understand what those underlying dynamics that exist and norms and behaviors that exist in communities are, and prepare communities to engage and receive groups that are experiencing or displaying a higher level of participation and agency, so that then it is safe for community members to, or marginalized community members to participate, and that the community can move forward as a whole. So I think that preparation and then working with different groups to foster willingness to engage, identifying entry points and key stakeholders that can support these inclusive processes, even in situations where we have tensions between groups or conflicts between groups is helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Brenda. Nicolas, would you like to respond to any of the questions posed?
I mean, I was reading as you were speaking. I mean, the questions, I mean, I think I will reiterate my point. I think, you know, I found the social cohesion concept a good concept to basically embrace a lot of I would say, implementation tools that use. Because it covers, you know, the concept of community, both, you know, intra-community and inter-community, which I think is essential when you're trying to deal with in spaces which are fragile, but also just for simple territorial local development. I think it's an important concept. And then also, you know, this notion of link with institutions, which I think, you know, is very central. And I do think that as we will move forward, you know, with the projects I mentioned, what I will try to pay attention on my side is basically how can we both move on the soft aspect, as I mentioned. I think it's very important, but I think if we just stay on the soft component of social cohesion, and by soft component, it's not pejorative and it's not negative, but what I'm trying to say, if we just focus on the social software of it, I think we will probably miss the opportunity of linking that concept with investment on the ground. And I think it's very important to think that social cohesion also thrives when local development happens. hopefully, so what we need to think of is how can we basically activate that process along with a way for us to basically provide, local economic opportunity and local investment. And I think, I think you will have some discussion on evidence-based and so on. I think that would be very important to tackle that well, to show that where in places where we put funding with some social cohesion activities, this soft skill that I was talking about, there is
thank you. I'm just seeing we're running close to time, so I just want to give other panelists a chance to respond to questions and maybe also get to some Zoom questions. Sorry to cut you off. But Onur, would you like to respond to maybe Maureen's question or any of the others?
Sure, just a very quick sort of, I hope I can gather all of the questions together in my answer. So one thing that we didn't really talk about were the structural constraints that we're all facing. So when I say structural, of course, I mean the written and unwritten rules governing relations between groups and individuals. Now, obviously, the human rights situation in the country, the informal economy in the country, etc. These are all real issues that we have to deal with all the time. The 3IE report, the rigorous impact evaluation that was commissioned by GIZ and mentioned in the opening speech, actually says that intergroup social cohesion interventions may not be sufficient for sustainable social cohesion without structural changes addressing threats to human security outcomes. So that's an important point. And it says the diffusion of effects to those who do not participate directly in any of the intervention activities tends to be smaller than the effects on people who receive a higher dosage of the intervention. So my answer to this is going to be that we bringing together, actually changing what we can control and bringing together people along similar groups, like those people who require the same protection issues, those who require the same education or livelihoods prospects. So that's why we work with, for example, vulnerable Turkish community and the Syrian refugee groups together. This makes it meaningful, really fitting the concept of social cohesion, just like I said in my presentation, to the specific needs of a specific group. And that requires a really, detailed knowledge of the context. Like Brenda said, like Michèle said, you really have to know the context very well when you're doing these interventions. One last thing, regarding a rights-based approach, we talk about social cohesion a lot, but we really must not forget that sometimes we have to run against social cohesion, or maybe when we're trying to empower women as agents so that they have the opportunity for group exit. Not everything in the group is good. So we have to really work with international human rights standards and, for example, promote CEDAW while we're working with refugee women as much as possible, in spite of whether or not it clashes with the group ideology, or whether we're helping social cohesion in that sense. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Maybe I'll add some questions from the Zoom and we can pose those to the remaining panelists as well. Lisa?
Sure, so we had several questions from Zoom. And one is, generally, what are some of the biggest challenges to implementing social cohesion in your respective contexts? From Karine, we had similar questions from Chris and Dereje about some of the challenges, and this is for Michèle, specifically when coming from standalone activities to mainstreaming social cohesion into other areas. And Lena, I'll summarize just for time. Lena from Search for Common Ground had a question around how we work more and more in places where there is military rule, autocratic rule, et cetera. And so we are less likely to experience democracy in most of our fragile contexts. And so we're less likely to achieve vertical social cohesion. So can we continue to boast the effects of horizontal cohesion even while state-citizen relationships deteriorate? And then finally, from Abiose, and so you can pick from this menu of questions, how does the social contact theory and programming apply in contexts where different groups live in close proximity versus contexts where residence is much more segregated?
Great, so we'll start with remarks from Aisalkyn.
Lots of questions. I'll try to address at least one or two of them. So I think, and this is maybe because I come from a research background myself, I'm a sociologist, so I'll speak to the point about to this question of how do we what are some of the things that we can do, right, when designing social cohesion programs? So one of the things that we've been doing at Search is what we call Grounded Accountability Model, or GAM. It's a participatory approach that we've been adapting with the help of our partners, Everyday Peace Indicators. I think they will be represented in the afternoon. And also Humanity United Foundation. So at the core of this approach is basically, and you may say, duh, right? We've been doing it, but at the core of it is basically, holding these consultations with communities at the outset, right, before the project. But also the focus is actually on unpacking these buzzwords like, economic empowerment, women's empowerment, right? Or social cohesion, or safety, peace, right? And actually asking, what does it mean for you, right, at this community level? And trying to come up with everyday indicators during these consultations, right? So that we can then integrate them into both design and some of, designing some of these activities and social cohesion programs, but also in the way we measure, so that it's not just a top-down indicator that we have all decided we will be tracking over the course of the project, but actually everyday indicators that these people themselves have generated, right? And when they were talking about what women's empowerment means, or what peace means, and so forth. So, and I think, to the point about sort of bridging, right, and bonding, I think there's also some of these divides can be overplayed, right, in literature and maybe our understandings. So again, just to kind of very quickly give an example, when we use this everyday indicator approach, in one of the examples in Afghanistan, 18 different villages, right, were the focus of the project. And when we talk to, be it men or women, young people or old people, when we were trying to generate these everyday indicators with them, right, or our partners at API, the main focus was, and the top most voted everyday indicator was some form of girls go to school, right, regardless of, and this was before last year, obviously this was in 2018, regardless of whether the village was under Taliban control or not, regardless of whether these were men or women, regardless of their age and ethnic background, people did vote for some form of girls go to school, right? And that was, that was just a sign that we may be overplaying some of these divides, right? And sort of reading into these dividing lines. But when we do hold these participatory approaches, such as GAM, for example, right, the grounded accountability model, we see that there's more commonality than difference. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry. I just want to give our last panelist, Michèle, a minute to respond to any of the menu of questions, and then thank you.
Yeah, there's a number of them. I'll answer to two questions with regards to social cohesion, mainstreaming versus standalone. So challenges, I would say one challenge we encountered is we underestimated the time that it would take. So someone was asking what would we recommend? I would recommend that two things when you're doing social cohesion, be it standalone or mainstreaming, you have a dedicated staff. Even if it's one staff, there has to be a dedicated staff. Just like gender, you can't mainstream gender if you have no one on the team that's fully focused on this. Otherwise, you will never be able to see real impact. So same thing for social cohesion. And unfortunately, some people tend to downplay it. Oh, it's just social cohesion. No, it's very important. And two, it's about conducting activities based off feedback from the community. Do not go in thinking, oh, we know the issues and we're just going to address them. No. If there's no ownership of these issues, ownership in the design, like for example, when we were doing the design of our social cohesion activities, we did a baseline, which included all the stakeholders I mentioned before. And then we had a design workshop with these same stakeholders. So by the time we started the project, it was very clear what we were doing. They were on board. These are things that they've already seen. So we did not have the usual issues with buy-in of who told you to do this. And, everyone was on board. So those two things I would recommend to do. As for challenges, one more challenge we had was that there's a team of 12, now reduced to 9 community-based facilitators that actually lead most of these activities, be it with others, but the main leaders. So unfortunately, in the beginning, it was entirely voluntary, but because they spent so much time on social cohesion activities, they didn't have enough time to spend on livelihood activities. So as you engage community-based facilitators for more than 6 hours, more than 3 times a week, 3 to 5 times, please think about a livelihood, even if it's a stipend. On our side, we went beyond a small stipend. We also now connected them to livelihood opportunities within other projects. So they gain more than just a stipend at the end of the month. So they're going to gain business skills. They're going to be trained in business skills. If they're part of a savings group, they're also going to be able to be supported, maybe to know how to use the savings. So things like that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michèle. I'm sorry to have to cut you all off. I'm sure we could talk about this all day, and we do have a full day ahead of us. So keep these questions in mind. And we now have a 15-minute break. I hope you join us back here at 11:15 for the next panel. Yes, you can measure social cohesion, strategies for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Big thanks to all of our panelists and to all of the audience members for listening and posing such great questions. Thanks, everyone.